We're now on the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis. We just proved that Rav Gamliel holds Ein Zika, and that's how Shmuel defended himself. And now the Rabbanan Savri Yesh Zika. In other words, the machlokas between Rabbanan and Rav Gamliel sort of broadened its scope. Until now, we were talking about Ein Maimer Achar Maimer, Yesh Maimer Achar Maimer, etc., etc. Now we're adding another dimension, and that is whether Yesh Zika or Ein Zika. Now the Gemara has the following. Even so, Ketani Seifa, at the end of the Bryce, it says, V'chenata Omer, the machlokes, which was explicitly originally in Shtei Yevamos v'Yavam Echad, the Bryce says in the Seifa, the same machlokes applies to Shnei Yevamim v'Yevama Achas. Two Yevamim. That means that just like in the case of one Yavam who gave a get to two Yevamos, and Chalitza is enough, one Chalitza for both of them, to patra both of them, so too in the case of two Yevamim, each one gave her a get to that same single Yevama, one Chalitza is enough from one of the two Yevamim. Now, that Chalitza is a Chalitza Psula, because once the get was given, as we said before, and the Rabbanan recognized the validity of both, then both Yevamim are excluded from Yibum, and therefore the Chalitza is a Chalitza Psula. Is this against the Shita of Rabba Barav Huna or Rav Yom Rav Huna Barav Chalitza Psula Tzricha Lachzor Kol Ha'achir? In the case of Chalitza Psula, which is after a get or after Maimer, you don't patter up the Yevama unless she herself received Chalitza. Meaning that Yavam that Yavam that gave her Chalitza, she's Ptura through that Chalitza, but she's still going to require a Chalitza from the other brother, the brother that gave her a get, or Maimer, and then he gave her Chalitza fine. So she got one Chalitza, but she can't get married yet, according to Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, until she gets a Chalitza from the other Yavam. That's called Tricha Lachzor Kol Ha'achim. Meaning that since Yesh Zika, a starker Zika, therefore any Chalitza that's not a flip side of Yibum, in other words, it's not in a situation where the alternative Yibum existed, there was no Ein Aruya Yibum, that kind of Chalitza is not strong enough to be mafkia the Zikas Yibum Legamre. So how could it be that the Rabbanan who hold Yesh Zika would say that in Shnei Yevamim v'Yevama Achas, and each one gave her a get or Maimar, that all she needs is one Chalitza? And the Gemara answers, Amalecha Rabba Barav Huna, don't ask from the Chachamim onto Rav. Because Rav's statement was based on Yesh Zika. But in this brisa, Bein Rav Gamliel, Bein Rabbanan Savri Ein Zika, this brisa has a transmission according to which even the Rabbanan hold the Ein Zika. They never had a machlokas about Yesh Zika or Ein Zika. So therefore, one chalitz is enough to patra both Yevamos. But Hacha, Beget Achar Geru, Maimar Achar Maimar Kamifligi. The whole machlokas boils down to the issue of two kinyonim, and whether Rabbanan Masaken that both kinyonim could be valid. Tiknu Chachamim Im Nosnu Koach this is machlokas Im Nosnu Koach Biyada Yevamim Lasos Yoser Mipamachas. right? Mimer and then another mimer, get and then another get. That according to Rabbi Gamliel, no. Every bias which needs yibum, teo misaken, etakonov, koach linkos, liknos, b'mimer echad, v'lidchos b'get achet, b'get echad. So there's only one ticket per person, one mimer, one get. Whereas according to Chachamim, each Yavam himself is given and granted a schus, a koach, to be kona and to be docha. And therefore, it's incumbent upon each Yevam and Yevama a koach to be poel b'fnei atzmo with regard to each one of the Yevamos. But the machlokas here has nothing to do with yesh zika or ein zika. Okay, then, so we'll take a little break now, and we'll pick it up a little later. Omar Mar. Now the Gemara is going to explain Rabbi Gamliel, who says that if you have a maimar in two Yevamos, then he should give chalitza to the Rishona, and he should be megarish the Rishona. And it implies that he cannot be miyabmi the Rishona. Why not? I mean, after all, Rabbi Gamliel holds ein maimar acha maimar, so the second maimar of the second Yevama is meaningless. It doesn't register. Omar Mar, also maimar bizu, and then chazavi also maimar bizu, b'yevamazu. Rabbi Gamliel Omer, no sen get, le mishasaba maimar, barishona, v'cholitzla, v'asu b'krovoseha. She becomes a grusha, and therefore he's also in the krovos of a grusha. She's also, by the way, a chalutza, so she has two strikes against her. She's both a grusha and a chalutza, so her krovos are certainly awesome. But mutter b'krovos shnia. He's allowed to marry the relatives of the second mimer, the second Baal HaMaimer, who received a mimer second. But the implication certainly is that he has to divorce the first Baal HaMaimer. And he has to give a chalitza as well. What's the problem? Why shouldn't he be able to be miyabim the Rishona? I mean, we asked this question. And the Gemara answers, we want to avoid a possibility that he shouldn't be miyabim the second one, which again, that's an Isser because he did a mimer to the Rishona. And why would he come to, heaven forbid, be miyabim the Shnia? The onlooker is going to think, well, just like the Yivam of the Rishon is mutter, the Yivam of Shnia is also mutter, meaning he has a choice which one of the two Yavamas he wants to be miyabim. However, as we know, the Yivam of the Shnia is also because he gave mimer to the Rishona. Now Rabbi Yochanan gives us a list, an enumerated list of Tanoim who hold that mimer is kona a kinyan chashiv. It has a tokef, it has a certain strength to it. Against the Chachamim, who say that mimer is kona just a kinyan d'Rabbana. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Gamliel, Beit Shammai, Rabbi Shimon ben Asi, Uben Azai, Rabbi Nechemia, Kulo Svirlu, mimer kona kinyan gom. Number one, Rabbi Gamliel, Hadi Amora, that there's no mimer after mimer, because mimer, the first mimer, is kona, that chelek of the Yevama, which is royal kinyan mimer. Beit Shammai, this now we have a Mishnah back on Daf Chav Tes, Shlosha Achim, three brothers, Shnai Mem Nesun Shtei Achis, Reuven and Shimon are married respectively to Rachel and Levi, Echad Mufta, and Levi is not married. Meis echad mibal yachil, either Ruvain or Shimon died. The Asaba Mufna Maimar. Mufna means Levi, who's not married. He did a Maimar in this Yevamot, we'll call a Rachel. Yakach Meis Achiv Hasheni. And now Shimon died. Shimon's wife Leah falls for Yibum to this Levi the Mufna, who had made a Maimar in Leah's sister Rachel when Reuven died. Beit Shammai Omrim, Ishto Imo. What does that mean, Ishto Imo? Zushas of a Maimar Nechsheves Ishto. V'noseres Imo She'ena Asura Mishum Achos Kukasa. Beit Shammai hold that as a result of the Maimar, she, the Balas HaMaimar, is considered Ishto. And there's no Isur for him, meaning Levi, after he performed Maimar, to marry her, even though L'chora, she should be Achos Kukasa. But no, the answer is that Beit Shammai hold that with the Maimar, she becomes Ishto. And Halaz, the second one, right? He did a Maimar. We said, so let's just get the names again. Right, so you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven dies, and he has it a little different. Reuven's married to Leah, apparently. Shimon's married to Rachel, and Levi was Miyabim Rachel. We're base Reuven below bottom. Nafla Rachel. Liftei Levi liyibum, v'yasabo Levi Maimer. Oh, so Levi did a Maimer in Rachel. Okay, that was what we had before. And then Shimon dies, and now Leah falls for Yibum to Levi. And according to Beit Shammai, when Levi did a Maimer in Rachel, he makes Rachel Ishto. Now, it's Maimer is Kona Kinyan Gomer. Therefore, when Shimon dies, Leah is Petur min achalitza min ayibum mishum achos ishto. Balazu teite means without yibum or chalitza. That's the status of Leah. Mishum achos isha. And why is it achos isha? Because we upgrade the Maimer to the level of a Kinyan Gomer, and Levi did a Maimer in Rachel, and then Leah doesn't fall for Yibum because she's an Erev. So she goes out without Yibum or Chalitza. Reb Shimon, the Sanya, we learned in a Brisa. Now, we had Reb Shimon and Chacham in a different context about Eiches Achim Shaloi Baloma, but this is a Mishnah later on in Daf Tzadi Vav, dealing with a Yavam who's only Ben Tesha, and he had a relationship and intimacy with his Yevamot. Now his brother has a relationship with the same Yevamot. Now Bias Ben Tesha is considered Bia. However, since he's a katan, he cannot be kona her minat Torah. So the Chachamim say that Bia is kona in the case of Mentesha in a Yevama like Maimar. So that Yevama is considered Ki'ilu Asaba Shnei Yevamim Maimar. Now, according to Chachamim, Yesh Maimar Acham Maimar. Therefore, she's Asur al Shneim. Each maimar is ma'akiv on the other yavam, respectively. L'chsheyagdil. That's the sheet of the Chacham. Reb Shimon says no. Bias ben teisha reik is suffik im he kona or lo kona. Therefore, the rishon is to be miyamim kishiyagdil. And Amar lahu Reb Shimon l'chachamim imanav sham. We can be matir her to the rishon. In bias rishon bia. No, despite the fact that he's a katan, he could be kona with bia. Who bia sheni ain't a bia. He cannot be kona with bia. Why? Because she's already knuya through bia rishona for the first katan ben teisha, and therefore that bia, which is not a bia of the second katan, doesn't generate an isra on the rishon. I'm assuming she's a shogeges. She didn't do this b'mezid. And in bias rishon ain't a bia, and if you go with the other side, that the bias rishon, since he's only a ben teisha, is not considered a bia, and there's no kinyan, and therefore you hold that the bia sheni is able to be ma'akev on the rishon. Bia sheni nami ain't a bia, to the same extent that the first one's bia is not a bia. Supply the same standard to the second one. Bias cotton is not considered a bia. So Rabbi Yochanan wants to prove that Maimer is kona kinyan gomer according to Reb Shimon. But bias ben teisha, the kemaimar shavyu rabbana. Right? The Chacham made a takana that the bia of ben tes is considered like nesu and rabbana, like a maimar, and he's kona of a maimar. And a maimar generates a chiv get. And nevertheless, Rabbi Shimon says that the bia sheni ain't a bia, because the bia rishon is kona kinyan gomer, and therefore you cannot have a chalos bia no sefes, another bia once she's already knuya legamer. And therefore, by virtue of the analogy between bias katan and maimar, we have to derive the conclusion that maimar itself, which midrabanan is effective, is a kona kinyan gomer. So there could not be another maimar added on top of it to generate another chiyuv get. Ben Azai desanya, Ben Azai omer yesh maimar achar maimar b'shnei yevamim v'yevama achas. The ein maimar achar maimar b'shtei yevamos v'yavam echad. So Ben Azai makes the following distinction: if you have two yevamim and one yevama, and each one of the yevamim did a maimar in that same yevama, then Ben Azai is in this camp of the Chachamim, and there's a chalos kinyan to both of them, and therefore she's asur l'shneim, and she needs to get mishneim. But in the case of shtei yevamos, so that's in the case where there was two yevamim and one yevam. So that's the Shitas Chacham, that each one of the Yavam has the schus to create a maimah. Therefore, she's asur l'shneim, she needs to get mishneim. But in the case where you don't have two Yavamim, but rather only one Yavam with two Yavamos, and now that single Yavam, there's only one Yavam, he does a maimah bezu, and then a maimar bezu, because there are two yevamos. And Ben Azai says in that case, the second maimar doesn't register. So once, according to Ben Azai's understanding, the Rabbanim were misakein maimar, they were misakein maimar as a kinyan gomer. So each yavam has a schus to be kona with a maimar. But the kinyan, right, so that's going to be in the case of two Yevamim. Each one is given a koach hakinyan to create, through Maimar, a kinyan gomer. Therefore, she needs a get from both of them. However, if one Yavam does a Maimar, in one of the Yevamos, so he's already Kona Mikoach Maimer Shetiklo Chacham in a Kinyan Gamur, and therefore he doesn't have a schus to be Kona another Kinyan. So that's going to be the case of Yavam Echad V'Shtei Yevamos. The Maimer is Kona Kinyan Gamur, and there's no possibility of that single Yavam to be Kona a second time. Reb Nechemia, Desnan. Reb Nechemia Omer Achas Be'ila V'Achas Chalitza Bein B'Tchila Bein B'Emtza Bein B'Sof Ein Achrei Klum. So according to the sheet of Rabbi Nechemia, Bia is always considered an absolute kinyan, and therefore you cannot have any possible mimer after this Bia, and the get would be meaningless. He's like a fremder, he's like a nachum. So Rabbi Yochanan says, according to Rabbi Nechemia, mimer apparently is konik kinyan gamur. For a Bia psula, the Bia that was done after a mimer or after a get, would be machlish. I mean, it was Zika through the get or the mimer that predated the Bia, was machlish the Zika. And therefore, Kim mimer shavur Rabbana. The Rabbana made a takana, and they said that the Bia is like a mimer. It's mafkia the Zikas Yibum, like a Bia B'Tchila. I mean, it's not. I meant to put a negative sign, but rather it's Kemaima. And she needs Chalitza with a get. Ukitani, and yet Rabbi Nechemia says, Ein Achrei Klum, that a mimer afterwards is not meaningful. So if there was a mimer that would be Kona after a mimer, then even after it be a psula, there should be a mimer that could be Kona. And the answer must be that according to Rabbi Nechemia, mimer is Kona Kinyan Gamur. And this leads us to the last line on the Gemara here on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis, Ketzad Osa Maimar. And then he gave a get, and she needs Chalitza because the get is not a replacement for Chalitza. The get is only to remove the Maimar. And the Gemara immediately asks, Hi get achar getu. Is the Mishnah now addressing the din of get achar get? The Mishnah explains the din of get achar maima. It didn't even get to get achar get. How do you read this Mishnah? On Rabbi Yehuda Achi Kamer, that's what the Tana meant. Get, we're on the top of Nun Beis. Get achar get umaimar achar maimar. That goes without saying. I don't have to explain it. Kidamoran. That was the Bryce that we quoted back on Nun Aleph. And there we understood that get achar get, maimar achar maimar, in Shnei Yevamos, and Yovam Echad, Shnei Yevamos, Yevama Achas. The Tana is not coming to go over those dinim, but rather to explain the din of Yovam Echad v'Yevama Achas, Ketzad HaTorasa. In a situation where there was a maimar or a get, also maimar b'vimto v'nosan lo get, tzricha imena chalitza. So even though the get is mafkia the maimar, but nevertheless because the zikas ibum she needs a chalitza. So this is going to lead us here to the fifth line down from the top. Osam maimar uba. Which Mitzvah Hashem will pick up tomorrow.